I'm here with Rob Ford, recording essay advice vidcasts for elections and voters. Question 3. Young and old voters have very different values and political priorities, but these are not reflected in politics because old people vote, but young people don't. Assess this claim with reference to Britain and America.
Okay, well the first thing you're really going to want to bear in mind with this question is that there are multiple claims being made in the statement, and you'll need to assess all of them and assess in particular the evidence for all of them. So the question is claiming that voters, young and old voters, have different values and they have different priorities. Those are two things that are going to need to be evidenced. The question also states that young and old people vote at different rates, they turn out at different rates. That claim will also need to be assessed. And finally, the claim is that the differences are not reflected in politics because of this differential in turnout. So you'll need to establish that in fact the values and priorities of younger voters are not reflected in politics. So there's a lot of work to be done there in terms of providing evidence for the claim or questioning whether or not the claim actually does have an evidence base. Once that task is done, you will also need to think about, well, what are the possible mechanisms that could explain why a statement of this kind would be made? Are the differences between old and young age differences, or are they differences in generation? Because if there are differences in generation, then perhaps it's not a systematic difference between old and young so much as people born in one period and people born in another, in which case this may be just a temporary effect. Also, you're going to want to think about whether turnout, which is the explanation given in the question, is the only possible explanation for such effects, for the different representation of older voters' priorities and younger voters' values and priorities. Could it be perhaps instead that there are differential voting patterns? Perhaps the young do not vote for mainstream parties in the same way as the old do. Could it be that the values that are expressed by the young cross-cut the traditional issues and priorities and values that have defined the parties in the past, causing them problems in terms of whether or not they can focus on these things? Or could there be other factors in play as well? That's obviously not an exhaustive list of the possibilities. So those are the things you're going to want to think about. How can you evidence the claims? What are the possible mechanisms for these claims? And what are the possible alternative factors in play that the question doesn't name?